right, welcome back. This is Adam Feinberg as your lead podcaster for Harlem Stories. And today I'm joined here with Denise and Dom.
Hello.
Glad to be back.
Glad to be back. Glad to be back.
Now, they've already told me that I'm like, okay, I'm going to be taking the lead on this one. So,
yes.
I'm going to just march on into it. We have a lot of our clients that ask us, very frankly, they're like, what can we expect, if we buy a Manhattan home? What can we expect on a rate of return? And, I say, listen, it's still a home and not necessarily an investment vehicle, not quite the same. But yeah, there's for a long time, there was always this expectation that, that this was a stable investment. And the reality is, in recent years, we've seen it not necessarily become unstable, but the fact is we are basically have moved backward a little bit, and unfortunately, we are stuck there. And I don't necessarily see this change easily or quickly back, especially with a city council that is, all about, what's popular and not necessarily what is intelligent. And, that's what concerns me. It's not about the politics. It's, for me, it's just the fact that I see a lot of things that are unnecessary or just going way overboard. And, today that's what I want to talk about. So we're going to talk a little bit about the regulatory and tax changes that changed the Manhattan real estate picture just as a whole, as we look at things over here. So just a little bit of background I think might be useful in this scenario. I've spent almost 17 years working on Wall Street in quite a number of areas. It's included regulatory and compliance areas as well. And there were times where I didn't work in regulatory or compliance areas, but I saw some stuff go down. It's just the reality of working on Wall Street. You tend to see a lot of risk. And people expect a lot of reward. But at one point, I worked for a hedge fund administrator where I reconciled trading activity daily for roughly 5 to 7 clients. Even if you don't know the hedge fund world, you might actually have heard of some of these players. Just watch CNBC for a little while, and odds are you'll probably have heard of some of them. One of them included Galleon Group, a fund where the CEO was convicted of insider trading. That was one of my clients. I started my career in a division of AIG that traded currencies and commodities, but later saw our CEO charged with civil fraud. And I believe that ultimately led to a new CEO coming in. And of course, the law of unintended consequences went into effect. And a different division of AIG was in large part responsible for the collapse of our economy back in 2008, 2009. So talk about the law of unintended consequences. You replace the CEO with an even riskier one. And, a lot of times the regulators just aren't seeing that. And in that case, it might have been justified with AIG, but at the same time, it was one of those things that you could not anticipate the end effect. And I think that's really the message that I kind of want to get across, in this episode. But all this, I'd say is, you can have good regulation and you can have bad regulation. And I've experienced a lot of well-intentioned but poorly executed regulation in my lifetime. And that seems to be the theme in New York City in recent years. Some of it not only starts out well-intentioned, but I actually agree with the premise of the new regulation. But until it winds up ultimately passing with way too much tacked onto it, and it becomes heavy, burdensome, and ultimately not being able to affect the change that was originally intended. And, we're going to talk quite a bit more about that in this episode. So obviously this is a little bit more of a button down, toned down kind of episode, a little bit more serious, but in the end of it, I want you to understand at least the reasons why, Manhattan has not seen this, like real rates of return in recent years, and why I don't necessarily see it, skyrocketing anytime soon either. Now, there's been a lot of pent up demand, so I'm not saying that like prices can't go up or that they won't go up. I'm just saying that like there's some weight being put on that upward movement that might keep things a lot more moderate than would otherwise be possible. And so our new mayor ran on a platform of freezing rents for rent-regulated apartments. And yeah, I can genuinely understand why this has become such a popular point of view or not. But I believe this is only going to create more problems in the city, and I don't say this lightly. But it's the regulation, additional taxes, and other various programs that have been implemented in the last decade that have put us into such an extreme position today. Urban Digs, an independent data source provider for New York City real estate, has categorized this period as a policy-driven reset. And I view this as a lost decade where condo and co-op prices are approximately the same as they were 10 years ago, while rents have skyrocketed and are, excuse me, and are at near all-time highs. We're not going to delve into like all the changes, and I had a laundry list of items that I felt we could talk about today, but I just felt like putting in a laundry list of like all the items that have come into regulation in the last decade, I don't think makes for a very interesting episode.
Interesting episode, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's kind of boring, so I tried not to do that very much, but I just want to cover at least a few key points, with my own perspective added into this. So first off, they kick off the catalyst for all the changes that happened, and this one was on a federal level. And this is actually like how I came into this business, and one of those things that I was actually interviewing my interviewers on when I was about to change careers and join the real estate profession. So in 2016, just to give you a little background, title insurance companies became required to identify natural persons or beneficial owners behind the legal entities that purchased residential properties, and it was primarily Miami and Manhattan for $3 million above. I think it also impacted other cities like LA and San Francisco and perhaps others, but I know that Miami and Manhattan were the two core ones. And this was the U.S. Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, that required this as a direct response to concerns that anonymous all-cash real estate transactions, often made through limited liability corporations, LLCs, were an easy method for criminals to launder money. So if I haven't mentioned it before, among the roles that I held in the past is I was the America's head of compliance training at Royal Bank of Scotland, where I also headed up all anti-money laundering training.
Wow.
So yeah, I'm like,
yeah.
So I can understand this, the feds wanting to put this into effect, and I'm coming from a perspective of like, okay, I understand the money laundering process, I understand what motivates it. Real estate is so easy. So when the feds came in and suggested, you know what, any purchase above $3 million, we're going to put through anti-money or money laundering investigative techniques. It's all got to go through, the banks now, and it has to go through these tests. And ultimately, when I heard this, and I started my career in real estate I started the first week of March in 2016, and these laws were about to go into effect, at that time. So one of the questions that I was asking every broker when I was interviewing, and I met with Elgren, and they got it right, and I met with another firm that no longer exists, but the director and I immediately clicked. But every other broker I asked these questions to got it wrong. And the question was really simple. It said, what do you think this new regulation is going to do to Manhattan real estate? My thought is, I'm like, there is so much illegal money sloshing around from certain groups. In this case, it was China and Russia. But it could have been any group. But at that time, I felt like it was China and Russia. And sure enough, what happened in 2016, I'm sure both of you can comment on, on how that's really been our peak, is we hit that marker right around that period. But I was asking all these brokers during the interview process, what do you think that this law is going to have effect on us? And I'm just like, my expected answer was that this is going to be a substantial hit to Manhattan luxury real estate market. And keep in mind, 3 million was enough for that to be called luxury.
Of course.
10 years ago. So, it was my expectation that any other broker really wasn't understanding the true economic impact of all of this. So this was the first major law that came into effect. I entered into the industry knowing that was going to have some sort of, significant impact. But I was amazed at how few brokers were really grasping that.
So this was your interview. You interviewed.
I'm interviewing.
Good.
Yeah, I actually had a few qualifications there, but that goes beyond this topic over here. For me, even though I was a rookie in the business, it was as I said to my earliest clients, I'm new to the business, but I'm not new to the business.
Right,
And
exactly.
it was because I was a condo board president and I had a lot of finance experience. So the combination of them, naturally led me to having more experience than a lot of the brokers that had 5+ years experience.
You do, in this industry, you must be able to add 2 + 2.
But also, the
have
thing is,
to.
it's you have a lot of people in this business that are also, let's say they have 10 years experience, but is it 10 years of growing experience, or is it 10 first year worth of experience 10 times over?
Exactly.
It's you have people that might have been in the industry for a very long time, but not everyone has equivalent level of experience or skill sets.
Right.
So for me, that was one of the key things for me is they have to be able to identify this as such a massive, significant changing effect for Manhattan real estate. So
it's so funny, I understand that you would interview the interviewer, because when I was being interviewed by a firm we both know, I asked the question, what is your, and this was back, 2012, this was way back. What is your top agent make, and what is the process that brings them to that? And they're like, who are you asking me that question?
It's an absolute legitimate question.
Right. I didn't get an answer, but I still work for the firm for some reason. I don't know why.
So one of the other questions I asked, the agent said, that's along a similar lines to what you asked, that I felt was really important. Because for me, I worked in learning and professional development. I created training departments. So one of them was related to training, but the one that was more relevant to your scenario is I asked them, I said, talk to me about, and I'm looking for a managing broker to learn under, and I want to learn under the best. So I asked, one of the key questions, I said, talk to me about your most difficult transactions and how you wind up executing them.
Right, exactly.
And the one that I ultimately wound up choosing, the one that you and I both worked together, and you was recruited and through as well. I asked him about it, and he came up with this example of, he's like, I had an overseas investor that wanted to buy in a co-op with 10% down and wanted to put in an LLC and rent it out on day one.
Okay.
I'm like, okay, this is the guy I want to learn from. So I'm like, I knew it immediately. I'm like, this is what I need to learn from. So that was like a.
It's funny. Years ago, that would have been a tough question. Today, it's like, okay, so what? Yeah.
But I can still tell you, maybe 90% of the brokers out there would say that's impossible. So, I mean, but I'm not looking at the 90%. I'm looking at the 10%.
Right, exactly.
And I think you are too. So, that's the issue there. But that was like a test for me to determine. I'm like, do I want to work for them? I'm like, if they don't understand this, then obviously I understand the economy and the market factors that are playing into this better than they do. I'm like, what am I going to learn from this broker if they're not seeing that? So for me, that was a big test, and there were only 2 firms that passed it, and ironically, I wound up working with both of them. So anyway, so if you look at the charts, and this is the point that I was making, you can trace the peak Manhattan market pricing to just prior to the implementation of this law in 2015. So, not coincidence, not coincidence at all. No, I'm not saying this is a bad thing because, having quite a bit of experience working with anti-money laundering, I think it's important primarily because of, some of it is just, basic scamming, but some of it, goes back to issues like terrorism. So, I do think that this was, a really good law that it was implemented. I do think it needed it to happen, but I can't say that about all of our laws that we've done in recent years. So in 2018 and 2019, New York City was hit with additional taxes and changes to the state and local tax deduction, or as we call it, SALT, additional transfer taxes, and also additional mansion taxes. So, all these were within control of the city and state, and yet we passed all these additional costs on to, our buyers and sellers. So, and that just we're going almost year by year, but I'm not trying to tackle everything, just a few key ones. So in 2019, we also saw a game changer of law, and this one was the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act, which we know as HSTPA, or I often hear it as just TPA, but this dramatically changed the rent-protected multifamily market overnight. These buildings lost 50% of their value in just one day, and led to the beginning of so many problems that we're experiencing now. So I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, but this was in the Real Deal, and I hate necessarily doing things that might be timeless. I like doing things that are timeless rather than timely. But in a recent article in the Real Deal, they basically wrote about something that I haven't really heard much about, but I'm sure we're going to probably hear more talk about this going forward as our new mayor-elect talks about freezing rents. But the problem is that this new law that went into effect in 2019, that HSTPA, it didn't allow landlords to now recoup inflationary changes, let alone improve property improvements and being able to pass that on.
Well, there were a number of things that happened in this law. No more year up front.
Right.
It only 1 month security. The $20 application fee was capped. You couldn't get a good faith deposit, which we would get always a good faith deposit. That was outlawed. So there are a lot of restrictions that were put in. And, it really didn't help a lot of the renters, because most people, especially those overseas, coming from overseas, would say, we'll just pay the year up front.
A lot of times they didn't have the credit.
They didn't have the credit, exactly. And so because now they couldn't pay the year up front, it was harder. They might have still rented, but now it was much harder. They had to jump through more loopholes. So a lot of these laws that are put in place to protect the tenants, so-called, are not really protecting them. They're restricting them in how they can move, rent in New York City.
Well, that's actually the point behind a lot of what I'm going to be talking about and going forward in this episode, too, is a lot of things that were popular weren't necessarily very intelligent, and they weren't well thought out. And in essence, is there anybody that's truly better off with, all these aspects? Probably not. Maybe there might be elements of it that are good. So, for instance, the tenant's only paying $20 application fee. Okay, from that aspect, they are better off.
Right.
But in the grand scheme of things,
again, there's always a caveat.
Always.
But to that, you have a lot more of competition, because you can put in $20 in multiple different apartments, and then everyone's putting in applications, and then
everywhere. Yes,
right.
Exactly.
So before, again, you had the good faith deposit. So it just allowed more stake. You put more stake in the game, and people were only applying if they were really willing to go forward with it. And so again, there's a caveat to everything, and I think that a lot of times that a lot of the policies or acts that get put into place are one-sided and not looking at the entire picture of the market.
Yeah, and
that good faith deposit too, not to really beat this, was if they had to pay a commission,
It goes into either the security deposit or your commission.
Right, exactly.
So yeah, I mean, ultimately, you're hearing about various different aspects of this law that went into place. But here's the kicker: looking forward several years, into the future now, into 2025, this law was enacted in 2019. What's happened? Rents have skyrocketed because now landlords can't afford to fix it up because they no longer have the tax breaks or tax incentives to do so. They're not getting, really their inflationary increases. Mm-hmm. So what happens? And if you're not making enough, you start losing money on a regular basis.
Right.
And what has recently happened, and this was in the Real Deal just a few weeks ago, is that the city pension invested into an investment fund that was made up of these rent-controlled and rent-stabilized buildings. And it lost 69% of its value. This is teachers and city government workers' retirement funds. So who did this really benefit? They're now seeing the implications. Now, this came out just a few weeks, that 69% number, that loss of 69%, that came out 2-3 weeks before the election. Now, I didn't hear too much about it in the public press, but you want to bet that everyone in the housing industry is going to be hitting Mandami over the head, with that figure and saying, you know what, this did not work as intended. And now you're going to have all these angry pensioners that are pissed off that part of their investment just lost 69%, because of these laws that were overkill. Now, he's also pushing for rent freezes. Do you really think that works in the same population of audience? So again, I'm not trying to be anti-regulation, but I've worked in regulatory areas, and there are things that can be solved via regulation. There are things that can't be solved via regulation. And what they're trying to do is force it into this, solved category when it can't work that way. It doesn't work that way. So I'm not going to get into all these specifics of HSTPA. I do have it. If anybody wants to know more about it, we're happy to elaborate on it. I think that's kind of overkill.
Reach out to us, yes.
Yeah, I think that's kind of overkill for this episode.
One thing I will say that is important is with the regulation that came in place is the amount of apartments that are sitting vacant right now.
Yeah.
That is very important in terms of the rent prices and the raising in rent prices because, again, basic economics is supply and demand.
Right.
If there's not enough supply and there's a ton of demand, the only thing that can go up is price.
So now the question is, why are they sitting on the sidelines? So that goes to a really important point is, they used to be able to, renovate as they saw fit and basically be able to pass on a certain portion of those costs onto the tenant directly. And some of it was also, they were able to recoup some of their costs in the form of tax breaks. The combination of both of those gone with this law. So now they can take the only thing that they can take advantage of now is now $15,000 renovation credit. Now, in the cost of renovating in New York City, $15,000 barely gets you a contractor in the door.
Yeah. Gosh, what can you use it?
So now,
for that?
That's why they're sitting vacant. It's not worth it.
Yeah. Right. So that's exactly the cause and the effect. So if they can't afford to fix up the apartment and make it habitable, not only just make it habitable, but actually to comply with our own city's laws on what's a habitable level of of livability within these apartments. But if they can't afford to make those upgrades, what they do, they're warehoused. They're
and even if they upgrade them, they can't raise the rent to market level to recoup that cost.
Right.
Yeah.
So point number 2, they're warehoused.
They're warehoused, yes, exactly.
So I'm and then we could go to point 3, 4, 5. The answer is
they're warehoused.
Exactly. So ultimately, these are the effects of it. They took what was a good idea because you did legitimately have some bad landlords out there that were taking advantage of the system. And I felt this rent-controlled, rent-stabilized world could use with some additional regulation. But then they took that idea and then they beat it over the head and just went all hog wild and just kept adding and adding and adding all sorts of craziness into it. So you guys might know this number better than I do, but there's a lot of these units are warehoused. You guys know about how many are warehoused?
I don't.
I don't know why this number comes to mind. Like, I don't know. No. I don't know.
Okay, I'm going to put the number out there because I've heard all numbers all over the map. I've heard anything like, I don't know, 15,000 to I've heard as high as 100,000 units.
I was going to say 20, but I thought
I think the most common number I tend to hear is like 20 to 30.
I was going to say that, but I'm like, that number might not be correct.
But I'm like right now, that's 20 to 30,000 apartments that, let's just assume that's probably the closer to reality number. But there's 20 to 30,000 apartments that we desperately need. And why our prices and rents go up? Because we have 20 or 30,000 apartments sitting warehoused that they can't afford to be fixed up. I'm like, we desperately need that inventory. So you have an economics background, Dom. What happens when you remove a lot of the supply?
As I said, prices are going to go up.
Right.
Prices are going to go up.
So I'm like, what did they think they were going to accomplish here? I'm like, again, this is what it comes to is like, the popular view is to have all this additional regulation and to beat the landlords over the head, because landlords are bad. But in reality, we see it as a different story. There are plenty of good landlords out there. Right. There are bad ones. I'm not excusing the bad behavior.
Right.
But there was reason to add additional regulations, but not the overkill that they wound up ultimately passing. And I think that, again, we talked about 2016, and I'm nowhere near done here, but in 2016 we added the anti-money laundering or the money laundering laws, needed, but then we go into 2018 and 19 additional taxes, 2019 the HSTPA, and then we continue. So, Mike, you're starting to see where the patterns emerge. And why I say, so much of our lost decade is really due to a combination of overtaxation and overregulation. And you start seeing that as a common theme. So the annual rent guidelines board for these rent-regulated apartments, they tend to, each year they meet, and it gets wild. And sometimes they actually need to have the police there, to kind of hold back some of the audience members and contain them, because it gets wild. But basically, if you listen to all the tenants out there, they basically have been calling for rent freeze or like 1% or incredibly low increases each year.
And these are for rent stabilized.
Yeah, these are for rent stabilized apartments. But again, as we now know, that there's 20 to 30,000 of these rent stabilized apartments that are off the market that are just constraining everything, and pushing prices up. So now on top,
but in life everything goes up. Everything goes
but
up.
Not at the rate, not at the exponential rate that it's going up because
of the warehousing.
Correct.
But here's the thing, I'm like, and this is the point that I was moving toward, which was, I'm like, if the annual rent guidelines board, if they're like effectively freezing it or coming up with like 1% rents, but inflation is at 5%, I'm like, there is a wide difference there that landlords basically are getting clobbered over. And what do they have to do in order to cover these differences? Market rate rents going up.
Yeah.
So I think these laws affect more the mom and pops than your big corporations.
Probably, I
because
think
they don't have as deep pockets.
But they also don't have as many units as well. So.
And exactly.
So I think it probably, yes, I would say that. In grand scheme, yes, they probably get affected more, but in the larger scheme of it, I think that the effect is probably
the same across the board?
Roughly around the same.
I think the reality kind of lies in a lot of our laws and the way that it treats corporations, larger corporations too, because I think to your point, it hits the mom and pops a little bit more, because if they basically put the building into foreclosure, they just hand over the keys in a large corporation, and next thing you know, it's a write-off.
Correct.
Mom and pop, this could have been their nest egg.
This is their retirement.
That's everything.
That's everything.
I see what you're saying.
So I think like there's different ways that the law treats these these different types of owners, and I think because of that, I think it affects the mom and pop a little bit, definitely more. They've got a lot more stake in it.
Yeah.
So and I think we kind of moved into it. So landlords are now like they're in a position where their taxes have gone up, their expenses have gone up, and yet then they can barely raise the rents.
And we just want to say that we're not being partial here.
Right.
It's just factual.
Right.
Which across the board, full transparency. What's happening in the real estate market.
Right.
We're not trying to say, oh, poor landlords or all of that. It's just giving facts. Because
I think it just comes down to a basic, right to housing. And not only that, I think if you look at it from a larger big picture, we don't want to become so wealthy that our workforce housing has there's for our worker bees out there that there's nowhere for them to live.
Right, because they're entitled to good housing and safe housing. Absolutely. Every human being on this planet is entitled to clean, safe housing.
And if you just look at other areas outside of the city, like Greenwich, Connecticut, who in a most basic job can afford to live in Greenwich, Connecticut? But
certainly not me.
but they might be able to live one town over in Portchester, New York, and Portchester is a lot more reasonable. So you're seeing the ultra wealthy in Greenwich, Connecticut, and you're seeing the worker bees in Portchester. Mm-hmm. So there's easy balance. But here, especially Manhattan, we're an island.
We're an island.
Yeah. Where are they going to go?
Where are they going to go? That's what I was going to say.
The answer might be as we've done in the past, but I don't hear anybody talking seriously about it. We add to the island.
Yeah. To that point, when I was looking, and this is many years ago, in New York, I couldn't afford New York even back then. So where did I go? New Jersey.
Right.
And that's where everyone, there's so many, I say transplants that are not New Jerseyans, but from New York, living in like the Hudson County area, like Hoboken, New Jersey,
Absolutely.
Jersey City, those areas. You can see the change, we don't want to talk about demographics or anything, but the change of the city,
right.
The scene of the city. So people, if they can't afford one, but now where are they going to go? Because Hoboken is just as expensive as New York City.
Yeah.
So we're pushing these worker bees where,
right.
Farther and farther.
Farther and farther away.
So we do need real workforce solutions, and I'm not just talking about like those that are living in NYCHA housing, and I'm talking about like, where do your bus drivers go? Where does your postal carrier go? I'm like, these are essential workers.
Essential workers. Yeah.
These are essential workers.
Yes.
I'm like, but where do they go? So
because they move the city. They keep the city going.
Yeah, and your waiters and your busboys and all of this.
They keep the city moving.
And I'm not even going to get into the immigration issues, but
let's not even go there.
Yeah, that's too hot of a topic for us.
Yeah, no, let's not even touch that.
But
not even.
But but the
remove
point,
that word out.
Yeah. So the point being is, we're just trying to give you the factual components of it, and the fact that it just as you start going through this and start looking at the laundry list of regulation and additional taxes, you realize it's just a pile-on effect, and it's just like I'm all for regulations that keep me safe. But I think they've got a really good example of all of this in recent. I don't know, where I have this, but somewhere in like recently, I want to say maybe a few weeks ago, there was a new law that was put into place. I think it was like a couple of years ago, but it was only first went into effect later this year. On gas detectors. So if you
gas detectors.
So if you have a
just
gas
got installed in my apartment too.
Yeah. So if you have a gas stove or
so it's not carbon monoxide detectors, gas.
Natural gas.
Natural gas.
So we need a fire alarm, carbon monoxide, and gas detectors.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh.
They just installed it in my.
Really?
Yeah.
And mine too. So the reason why I call this one out is because, well, we've had a couple of natural gas explosions in the city.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you know what? So they made this law where like everyone needs to get a gas detector installed.
So in condo and co-op buildings, who is responsible? The individual owner?
Well,
or the building has to.
Well, the property manager is overall responsible. For and handling. But you're getting to my key point. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting to it. So I just want to clarify. These gas detectors, they look almost identical to the way a smoke detector is, especially ones that
are they all combined now?
No,
not yet.
Not yet. That's probably the next step.
That's probably the next generation of devices.
But this one is now. They're
separate. So they're battery operated with a 10-year battery life. Installing one of these things is just a simple screw in the wall.
Yeah,
right.
Nothing more than that. So tell me why, as part of this law, that they required a master plumber to do all of these installations. There's no plumbing involved. There's no technical aspects involved. But now the master plumber population in all of the city, all 5 boroughs, is somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 to 700 master plumbers. And I can tell you, not only are they way too busy to do every building in the city that has these, but on top of it, they're going to charge a fortune.
I don't know in every building, but every unit in the building, in a building.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
So now this is a perfect example of the over-regulating that I'm talking about. So now every building had to have a master plumber install these devices. They're nothing more than a screw in the wall.
Mm-hmm.
So interesting.
So when I talk about it's a pile-on effect, I didn't object to having a gas detector installed in my home. I thought, you know what, that's not a bad idea. But it's when they take it to the next level, and this is what's been happening. Mm-hmm. This is the city council. So a lot of people ask me, like, what do you think of Mandami? And I don't necessarily want to get into the politics of it. No. But here's my very realistic answer. It's like his policies are aligned with exactly what we've already been seeing within city council. So therefore, my opinion of Mayor-elect Mandami is that he is simply more of the same. So a lot of people are scared of it, but the reality is this is exactly what we've been seeing. And I'm not saying whether he's going to be good or bad or, whether I'm pro Mandami but the reality is, what we're seeing, especially with his freezing of rent, that he ran on, it's the same kind of behaviors that we've been seeing at the city council. And it really does wind up being a pile-on effect. But yeah, we've seen policy after policy where the popular opinion was we've seen recently, eliminating broker fees. That really did not ultimately, as we've discussed, that really did not really make things cheaper for anybody. Who did it really help?
The cost is going to go somewhere.
The cost has to go somewhere.
The cost is going to go somewhere. It's not going to just disappear.
Right.
Yeah, poof.
Yeah.
No.
Now, will landlords absorb some of it? Maybe. Will the brokers absorb some of it? Maybe. But ultimately, it's not making it cheaper for the tenants.
No.
So, that is, the bigger component of all of it. So, anyway, that whole thing with the gas detector, I think that really expands a lot of what I was talking about. Another recent thing that we're just seeing come up now is the well-intentioned laws that aren't going to achieve what was envisioned, the replacement of the 421A tax abatement program, this new program called the 485X tax abatement. And what's happening is this new law was supposed to be a replacement. Developers welcomed the new law with a lukewarm response. Why? Because they were all asking for a new tax abatement as an incentive to build. And ultimately, they're now submitting building plans for new buildings, and the provision is backfiring. Why? because in order for them to get the tax abatement, it requires developments with 100 or more units to pay a minimum wage of $41 an hour, as opposed to compared to the New York City minimum wage of $16.50 an hour. So what's happening? Developers are saying, you know what, we're not going to build 100 units or more. So what they're all doing? 99 units. 99 bottles of beer on the wall, except their developments.
Well, at least the buildings were a little lower.
Yeah. So I mean, again, it's like this continued pile-on of poorly thought out process. Now, I'm not saying the 421A program was perfect, and I benefited massively from the 421A because it allowed, I forgot which New York Yankee, but ultimately the program got pulled when they found out one of the New York Yankees in a Donald Trump building was saving a couple $100,000 in property taxes a year because that building got a 421A and it wasn't really what the program was meant for. So that's what kind of killed off the 421A program. That said, this is Harlem Stories, and we talk about Harlem, and there's still a lot of buildings out there that still have that 421A. Now, most of them, it's starting to roll off and expire, but still, it's still a big tax savings in the years that it still remains.
And for our audience, how long typically does that 421A tax abatement last or go for?
So in Harlem, we saw two different time frames that were implemented. There was a 15-year horizon and there was a 25-year horizon. And the way that these all work is the final 5 years, no matter what the duration is, the final 5 years, it would start to roll off. So a 15-year tax abatement, the first 10 years, you get 100% abatement. And then each of the last 5 years, it's a 20% of the full amount.
Yep. So what, 20 years?
So no, it'd be 15 years.
15.
10
okay.
years. And mine was, in the second category of 25 years. So the first 20 years I get the full abatement, and then I still get an abatement for the final 5 years, but it starts reducing. So yeah, but the 485X program, with that requirement for a much higher pay scale, well, it's backfiring already. And, developers might be able to build really much significantly larger buildings, but they're like, why?
Yeah.
I'm like, it's going to cost me a fortune to, build that many more units. So, this is like all, crazy stuff. But, let me, without necessarily giving you the full laundry list, just quickly kind of breeze through a few of the additional laws, some which I promise you most of our agents probably haven't even heard or aren't even aware of. Having served on a condo board, I'm more than a little aware. But there was right around the deadline of this was right around when COVID hit, but there was a requirement to add smart sensors to your elevators. I can tell you that typically costs $20,000 to $30,000. Even if your elevator was on the newer side, up until I think 2007 or 2009, something like that, but you can have a relatively modern elevator and now have to spend $20,000 to $30,000 per elevator upgrading on that one. Parking garage inspections, and that one I actually agree with. Like that was needed.
Was that due to the Miami?
I think actually it was, I don't know when exactly it was implemented, but I know it was on the table before the Miami building collapse. But yeah, I mean, I think,
agree with that one too.
Yeah, definitely.
So some of these are sensible, but if you look at like local law 11, you have to do it that inspection every 5 years of
it
your
used to
facade.
Be 10, right? Then they reduced it to 5.
I don't know. You could be right, but
it was always 5. Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. So yeah, my concern there, and maybe this is where your confusion stemmed from, because I'm like, I've heard this over and over again, but does local law 11 need to be done every 5 years?
Well, I think they
they probe it, and if they don't find anything,
right,
they don't necessarily need to do.
Yeah, like if it's a big building, they do phases.
Yeah, right.
It's phase 1 will do maybe from 3 to 20. And then phase 2, so it's different phases. But
it's still a 5-year cycle, and the reality is, and
it's still scaffolding. It's still this. It's still
and
that.
And I've spoken to building inspectors, engineers, and architects, and they all question does this really need to be done every 5 years? Yeah. Can it be done 7 years? Can it be done 10 years? Well, I mean, everyone agrees that
must be making money from it.
Yeah.
That's why.
I mean, the scaffolding business is.
Oh my gosh! Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's get into that business.
Yeah.
But the reality is, it's expensive. It is technical. Yeah. It is time consuming. All these things. So the question is, like, I don't know that anybody is realistically pushing back. Do we need local law 11? I think we do.
We do, for sure.
But do we need it every 5 years is the bigger question.
But as you say, to your point previously, hot, cold, freeze, melt, freeze. So what happens to that mortar? It's constantly moving. And then the city's always vibrating.
Right.
Fire trucks, these big trucks. So buildings are always moving, vibrating.
And in another episode, we'll talk about how 125th Street is along a fault line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
maybe
we do.
Maybe we do. I think we do. I have no qualms about that.
But here's the thing. I've spoken to engineers, architects, inspectors, and I've asked them all, like at every opportunity, I'm like, does local law 11 need to be done every 5 years? And the overwhelming answer is no, it doesn't. Okay. Now, we do need it, but is 5 years the right horizon? I don't think so. I think it's probably more along the lines of 7 or 10 years.
I thought it was 10 at one time. I don't know.
It might have been what you were hearing is everyone was proposing 10 years. Yeah. And maybe that's, what you're picking up on the aspect. But then there were, other aspects of, of these regulations that we picked up, that basically ignore local law 11, such as lending on a building that it has it. Mm-hmm. So in New York City, we've been doing the right thing by being responsible and having regulation in place, so that a Miami-style building collapse doesn't happen here. Mm-hmm. But yet our banks will penalize us for this. So it has other additional impacts and effects. So, not only is local law 11 expensive and time consuming, but now it also makes our buildings more difficult to finance and refinance it. So it's just adding all these things. And now I just had a scare, again, this is going to kind of be on a timely basis, but I had a scare last week because of newly proposed legislation. Yes. Big shocker. So there's this new one. Apparently, it was on the books for years ago that they were going to pass, and then it got forgotten about, and now all of a sudden it woke up, and which is this new COPA. What is COPA stand for?
Yes, this new COPA. Yes.
What is COPA? I thought I wrote it down somewhere, but Community Opportunity to Purchase Act.
Yes.
So.
I was thinking about you with your
my 5 family.
Yes, your 5 family.
So for anybody that's not familiar, what they were proposing was that 3 family homes and above, basically now had to go through this nonprofit craziness of, basically requiring the opportunity for a nonprofit to buy in advance of you putting it on the market. And it was something like they gave them like a 90-day or 60-day time frame.
Right.
And
I think it was 90.
I think it was 92.
Yeah.
But they gave them like this 90-day time frame in order which these nonprofits could make the decision whether they want to move forward with purchasing, basically like a right of first refusal for 3 families or above. And then if they don't move forward, it's like the seller has now, has lost 3 months of time, of listing it on the market.
Right.
But now on top of it,
it's mandatory, as you said, they have to reach out to the city first.
Yeah, and then let's say they pass, and then what happens is they get an offer. Now it goes to like a right of refusal process where they could potentially match the offer, of somebody that was a market rate participant. And all this, I'm like, this is now just insanity, layer after layer after layer.
I think it's eminent domain just cloaked in this.
Yeah, I'd say that's a close. So actually, it was one of the regulatory bodies of the city that basically pushed back last week. And the bill has now changed dramatically since in the last week.
Oh.
So it no longer winds up applying to my owner that has a 5-family for
Thank
sale.
Goodness.
It now is limited, and I think what happened was HPD was overwhelmed, Housing and Preservation Development. I think they were overwhelmed with this proposal because they're already overwhelmed with what they already have on their plate. So they basically tried to limit the universe, and now it's a much more acceptable level universe. So basically, the buildings it now applies to is I think it's, I don't know if it's still the same 3-family or larger now, but now it's basically buildings that are in distress that have a certain number of violations.
That makes sense.
Alternatively, if it was already in an existing affordability program that might have been up for expiration. So now that's a much more limited universe than
Makes
all,
sense too.
all 3 families.
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean there was all these crazy things one after another. You know, I'm not going to go into like everything, but I guarantee you, I think I came up with, you know, when I was going through preparing for this episode, I think I must have came up with, just in the last 10 years, it was probably, I want to say, at least 30 different new regulations and taxes. You know, so it really just kind of really highlights just what kind of strain that we're under. That said, you know, going to the, you know, what our marketing background as agents, you know, go to, is it's amazing how well our prices have actually held up when you consider the extreme levels of regulation and taxes that we've gone through. Now, other parts in the country, I kind of feel like they're, you know, a lot of places they're in bubble territory. And, you know, they're ready to kind of, I think, either deflate slowly or maybe there's a possibility of a crash. I'm thinking the crash is less likely. I'm thinking more likely a slow deflation of prices. And that's what we've been seeing since the Fed started hiking prices. Medium home prices throughout the country, I think was 3 years ago, it was like 440,000, then came down to like something like 425. And the last read that I saw was like 410. Okay. So it's kind of reinforcing what I'm saying, like, is this slow, gradual deflation of prices? Because in some areas of the country, you saw 90% price increases, you know, in like a year or two. Yeah. So that wasn't sustainable. Ours is, but, you know, I think if, you know, as we look to wind down on this episode, I just kind of want to point out that, I think we've gone through the bulk of our pain, and we're still, in the grand scheme of things, okay. But at the same token, you know, just we got to keep vigilant for adding unnecessary regulations. And I think that's like the key message here. And it's not that we're not anti-regulation. You know, here the 3 of us, none of us are.
Absolutely, we're not.
You know, we're not anti-regulation. No. We're not for bad landlords. You know, but things have got to be held at a reasonable level. Yes. So I think that is good enough for us to kind of.
That's a wrap.
Yeah, to wrap up on, and you know, again, as always, you know, we appreciate you as our listeners.
Appreciate our audience. Yes.
Appreciate our audience. Thank you so much. But definitely, if you enjoyed it, click that like button, share that with the podcast with your friends, family, you know, and everyone that you know that might have
feedback
an
is welcome also.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
But
thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Have a great day.